There is no right or wrong to our feelings. It's absolutely fine to experience all kinds of emotions because it's the law of nature. When you are feeling angry, all it takes is 90 seconds to fully and deeply feel your emotions without any distractions. One thing that is very common in today's society is that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. Instead, they listen to respond, which creates discord, it creates resentment, it creates frustration. What we are really lacking as a society collectively today is emotional intelligence. Our stress comes from the type of food we consume. Did you know that one of the major factors contributing to imbalances in many areas of our life starts with the most important thing that is essential for human survival, which is the food we eat. Diet plays a very important role in our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. We are often told that a good diet is really important for our physical health, but what nobody tells us is that it's far more important for our emotional health. There are two primary perspectives on why emotional intelligence is not taught from a young age. The first perspective would suggest adults who simply do not have any awareness about emotional intelligence, and this rings true for many who grew up with emotionally unavailable parents. So these behaviors are deeply ingrained and normalized, so much so that is all they ever know. So they make little effort to change any of these patterns. The second perspective would suggest if everyone around becomes emotionally intelligent, there will be no room for manipulation or control, which is a human superpower to be able to have control and power over others to continue to dominate them. These are people who are intelligent enough to know the power of emotional intelligence could potentially diminish their own influence or could bring a sense of loss to them, and therefore it remains suppressed and not taught. My name is Veena Raji and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to talking about healing from childhood trauma, narcissistic abuse, and attachment styles, something that I've worked on myself over the last couple of years on my own without any professional help or guidance. So I have dedicated to starting this channel to share about my experience and my journey, hoping that it will help for those who are currently on a similar path. Now, if you are new here, I would really appreciate if you could just take a moment to hit like, subscribe, comment down below. This would help me to grow my community and grow my channel, and you would also not miss out on the videos that I post here on a weekly basis. In the current landscape, we see a lot of people are lacking in emotional intelligence, and this is a cause for concern because we are currently operating in a fast-paced technology-driven era, one which is action-oriented. We are constantly moving, and with that, we have devised a shortcut to everything we need. As much as the shortcuts are designed for convenience and ease, it has created a massive disconnect in the way we live our life, which goes against the law of nature. And with everything else, when we go against the law of nature, we create an imbalance, and that is what we see most people struggling with today in the form of mental health issues, and most commonly a lot of people are struggling with anxiety and stress. The fact is, the innovation of technology and its expansion will continue, and no one is going to be able to stop innovation. However, it is about time that we call to address the imbalance that is plaguing many of us, which has disrupted our way of life. Emotional intelligence is not taught at schools. And unfortunately, it's also not taught in homes either, as we see it for what it is now. many people are coming forward and sharing their emotional battles and mental health challenges growing up with parents who were emotionally neglectful or lacked emotional regulation skills. So when you grew up with a parent that resorted to authoritarian methods, you would think it's normal to be that way, to enforce discipline or to lead a change. So naturally, when we hire people, especially in a work setting, in a corporation, we don't usually know a person's personality or their mental health status. In fact, mental health has only been spoken a lot in the last few years, which is making a huge impact in the community as people are starting to break the bubble of silence and shame and finally confronting their inner turmoil in ways that more people are starting to take responsibility for their mental health struggle, and that includes many people actually starting to walk away from jobs that don't bring them peace. Now, let's imagine if someone grew up in an environment where they had to perform to be seen, to be accepted, they view failure as a disaster or disappointment, which is common symptom for those who struggle with performance anxiety, which a lot of career-driven or career-oriented individuals struggle with. They would most likely be able to relate to having performance anxiety. And I, for one, was very ambitious and very career-driven when I was in my corporate job, and I would often suffer a lot of anxiety myself when I feel like I wasn't able to live up to expectations, or I could not exceed my own expectations sometimes, which does seem a little unrealistic. Now, these are people who do carry unaddressed trauma, where over time they are not able to distinguish between their perceived value for success. So when this person becomes a leader in a workplace and is called to lead a team of people, how can we expect them to lead in a way that is going to bring people together? That requires emotional intelligence, something that they were never taught, or maybe they never had an opportunity to learn. When we operate from a place of wounding, we often view everything as a glass half empty, and they would also project their demands and expectations on their team members or their employees that can sometimes be unrealistic and can be very demotivating. Now, for some leaders or managers, they also tend to resort to micromanaging. So let's speak about micromanaging. Essentially, micromanaging is really trying to control everything around them because they likely grew up in a similar environment. So as an adult, these traits would continue to play out in their lives, in their relationships, in their professional life, and they would only feel safe in their body when they can control everything around them, which is often not healthy, and it can be detrimental for many reasons. You see, a good leader will be able to explore an individual's strengths and weaknesses and devise a plan in ways that can benefit the individual, the manager, as well as the business. But unfortunately, this isn't the case with many employers. When the people leading others aren't emotionally equipped to lead in healthy ways, it will lead to the ultimate demise of good talents that would often choose to walk away to preserve their own sanity, because people cannot survive for long in a toxic environment. And a toxic environment is a result of lack of emotional intelligence. Unfortunately, this kind of leaders do exist on a large spectrum, and as someone who has worked in corporate for over a decade, I have had the opportunity to experience both kinds of leadership. Now, I've had an experience with a leader, one who was just compassionate with an individualistic approach, who was able to identify my strength and understood my career aspirations and work together in hand for me to be able to move forward. And on the other hand of spectrum, I've experienced a leader who was very much disconnected and imbalanced in their leadership abilities, constantly exerting dominance and control in everything that we did. Now, the reality is no adult wants to be controlled, wants to be put under a microscope and treated like a kid. And being in the presence of someone that is domineering and controlling is counterproductive, because it did reach a point when I was so stressed and had so much anxiety and doubting my own abilities because I was constantly criticized. I had a very critical manager, and on the other hand, when I had a very supportive, individualistic, compassionate leader, I was able to progress in my career. So leadership does make a significant impact on how we perform at work, and how it can also severely impact our mental health. Speaking of relationships, considering how much we have all evolved in the modern world with so much access to anything we could want, a lot of people are looking for instant gratification because we have the illusion of having options. People make bad choices, people make bad decisions when we are given too many options, or when everything is made easily accessible. And social media created these perceptions that life can be different and better when they compare to people that they see online having a better life. And this creates an instant disconnect in the way they connect with their own relationships, because they start comparing, and that creates this silent resentment that builds over time, and it would eventually start affecting in the way they show up and connect with their partners. When we look at the lack of emotional intelligence in relationships, we can look at the way communications were not given much priority, especially back in the days. The society works in such way that women are not to be opinionated, and men were never taught to consider their counterparts or their thoughts. So there's this built-in sense of neglect and dismissal of another person that has been cultivated since young, something that a lot of men have also watched while growing up. They see that the father leads and the mother isn't allowed to have an opinion, and it becomes a mirror to how they show up in their own adult relationships. Or on the other hand, a lot of these adults are also people who have experienced that themselves while growing up with parents who were neglectful and dismissive. So naturally, they tend to mirror back these patterns to people around them, especially in their romantic relationships, because they never learned healthy emotional connection. There is a lot of evidence that supports that a man who had a healthy, stable, loving home with parents who instill certain values do treat women well as their equal, because they were taught these values since young. And the opposite is true for a man who lacks healthy modeling at home, because they do not have the relationship skills to hold space, or to rather create a safe space for the women in their lives. So they are more driven by their ego. They tend to hold on to power in order to feel in control. And again, this goes back to the lack of emotional intelligence. Now, let's say, for example, a woman that is upset at her spouse and she wants to have a conversation to get the message across with the hope of wanting to feel seen and heard and understood. But she also needs to take into consideration not to dump her problem as soon as her partner returns home after a long day at work. Instead, check in with him to see when it would be the right time to have an important conversation. And now this requires consideration, and that requires emotional intelligence. Now instead, if she brings this up right the moment he gets back home, and this would most likely turn into an argument because you do not know the emotional state of the other person. So having consideration and approaching someone respecting that they might not be in the best place at that time, emotionally, mentally, is going to require emotional intelligence. And I noticed that a lot of people don't seem to understand this. They just think that just because they're upset and need to get a message across, they need to get the problem out, they need to have that conversation. They don't think about the other person's emotional state, if it would be an appropriate time. And this is so important. So without emotional intelligence, a man can also be quick to dismiss the woman, calling her naggy or sensitive, and this would only lead to further resentment. And this happens because that is likely what he witnessed from his parents growing up. One thing that is very common in today's society is that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. Instead, they listen to respond, which creates discord, it creates resentment, it creates frustration. What we are really lacking as a society collectively today is emotional intelligence. If we can all develop emotional intelligence, we will not see every conversation as a feedback or criticism. Because when we view something as a criticism, our impulse is to go on a defense, which is a protective mechanism, and that clouds our ability to see the other person who is trying to share about what they actually want and need. And not being able to hold space and listen to them will make them feel rejected or dismissed or unheard. And I have to say this though with much respect, a lot of people that I interact with do not have the capacity to hold space, to listen, to understand. A lot of people would listen to respond and project something that we have all learned from the homes that we grew up in. However, with the access to independence, no one fortunately needs to depend on another person to survive. So instead of seeking repair, a lot of people are quick to call it quits because we have this perception that there are options out there. But in some cases, walking away is absolutely necessary, especially in toxic relationships, because these are the kind of relationships that can destroy our mental health, and it's obviously not advisable to stay in such dynamics. If we understand that emotional intelligence comes from our body's intelligence, we will be able to navigate between the mind, body, and consciousness, which is often the root cause of all stress. We need to develop a state of self-awareness to be able to listen to our body, which often tells us between right and wrong in the form of gut feelings. Our body has the capability to send signal to our mind when something is off or when we are in the presence of a danger. And we often hear stories of people saying that they didn't feel like going to a party, to attend an event, to sign a certain contract, to associate with certain people because their gut feelings could sense that it is not right for them, because we are all energetic beings. And eventually, when some time has passed, you would hear stories that something went wrong at the very place where your body was warning you to not be there. Now, our gut feelings is very, very powerful. But what also happens is that we tend to dismiss our body's intelligence by relying too much on the outside factors. One, where the mind gets to control the narrative that suits us because it is convenient to us. We tend to manipulate our body's intelligence just so that we can meet our own needs, even if it's not right for us. What is anxiety? Anxiety is caused by unresolved emotions. And unresolved emotion is often not processed properly. You don't let go of the anger, you don't let go of the fear, and this leads to accumulated stress in the body. And stress can create various illnesses in the body. Most, if not all, illnesses are a manifestation of stress. Having emotional intelligence allows us to understand there is no right or wrong to our feelings. It's absolutely fine to experience all kinds of emotions because it's the law of nature. When you are feeling angry, all it takes is 90 seconds to fully and deeply feel your emotions without any distractions. And that includes someone trying to pacify you or justify a situation or give reasoning. Instead, if you can just take 90 seconds to yourself, or maybe a few minutes, take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just feel those emotions deeply and just do a few breathing exercises, you will be able to let it go and not suppress it in your body. You will feel so much better just within a few hours, and by the next day, it would hardly even matter. The foundation of trauma is due to unaddressed and unexpressed emotion. So if we know how to deal with our emotions when it surfaces without any distractions, we will be able to return back to our normal state of regulated nervous system. Our body is extremely intelligent. When we don't try to solve it by releasing it through our body, it ends up staying trapped inside our body, and the unregulated nervous system that keeps taking on these burdens without releasing it will eventually reach its breaking point. The key to healing anxiety and healing trauma is closely connected to having the emotional intelligence to understand our own difficult emotions and process them. So what causes stress? What is stress? Stress is a bodily imbalance which leads to disharmony between the mind, body, and consciousness. And what does stress do? Stress leads to anxiety, feeling out of control, and anxiety leads to depression, and prolonged depression leads to disease because of the disease we have caused our body. So how do you handle stress? Listen to your body's intelligence. Be authentic with your emotions. Be honest, acknowledge and admit to your emotions instead of trying to suppress it. When you are angry, just acknowledge it. Just acknowledge that you're angry without any guilt or shame. When you're feeling upset, just let it be. Acknowledge that you're feeling upset without trying to make any excuses for the way you're feeling. Just sit with those emotions. No distractions, no substances. Maybe play some light music if you need something, and do absolutely nothing. Sometimes all you need to do is absolutely nothing. It's as simple as that. Do not engage in pseudo positivity, trying to manipulate your emotions to distract yourself from your true emotion. Be authentic to yourself. Now, the problem is stress has evolved today due to our own perception of talent and success in our material world. So when we are faced with uncomfortable emotions, we want to try and find something to feel better. So we tend to engage in trying to listen to motivational videos. We try to listen to quotes so that we can feel better. And a lot of people these days also turn to tarot readings. Now, all this is trying to create pseudo positivity so that you can distract yourself from the emotions that you are experiencing. Listening to your body and being authentic with your emotions create a cellular intelligence on a psychological level, and that is the natural law. And if you follow the rule book, your body goes into balance, and that enhances your body's inner healing intelligence.